This is Radio National.
Stay tuned for Freedom News and Commentary, The Last Roundup.
The opinions expressed in the last roundup are those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or views of this station or its sponsors.
I'm heading for the last roundup.
Hated man! Top of the world!
Gonna
Said I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. I said I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Greetings out there and welcome to this last roundup of November 14th, 2010. The faces you see up on your screen, if you're watching on Stickcam, are Glenn Beck and George Soros. This week was sort of an interesting week because we had, in effect, two different strains of the battle for the control of our national consciousness. We had the mainstream media battle going on between Glenn Beck and George Soros. You know, the so-called right wing and the so-called left wing duking it out. And very interesting program. I recommend you go up on YouTube and watch Glenn Beck's series on George Soros. It's interesting, to say the least. The other battle going on in the public consciousness was actually far more interesting because it involved much more grassroots media versus the dreaded Department of Homeland Security. An internet firestorm started by Alex Jones and amplified by the Drudge Report finally broke through the mainstream media's near total embargo on all criticisms of the Israeli-style security measures being instituted at our airports, humiliating, invasive techniques that would be repugnant to any free people. It is worthy to note that Israeli companies and Israeli dual citizens are massively profiting from these draconian and humiliating security measures. Let's not forget the grotesque image of Michael Chertoff. The image you are seeing on your screen if watching the Stickcam stream is a tableau with a naked body scan and a poster for an old television program that I think is highly symbolic of what has happened this week. We as ordinary citizens might as well be ghosts for all the impact we seem to have on government policy. For the younger crowd, there was once a movie and TV program called Topper. Topper is an absent-minded banker, of all things, who is adopted by ghosts, a man and woman named the Kirbys, George and Marion Kirby. In the film, for the deceased ghosts to be released to heaven, they have to do a good deed and have chosen Topper as the living vehicle to carry out that good deed. The TV version also has Topper as the living vehicle to carry out the Kirbys' various good deeds. The basic theme is that the dead cannot influence events on Earth directly because they have no earthly power. Sound familiar? That happens to also describe the situation of the average American. You know, the Glenn Becks of the world are really there to give you the impression that you have power when, of course, you really don't. Like the dead, we petition our leaders to no avail. It sort of reminds me of that image that's seen in the old Scrooge film with the wealthy people who are dead trying to throw, gold coins at the poor living people, and because they're dead, they're unable to influence the events that affect the living. The Kirbys are also powerless in the physical world except through the actions of Topper. We have discovered this week that our Topper may just be the internet. Alex Jones, through manipulation of the Google search results, telling his audience to do repeated searches relating to naked body scans, forced that story to the top of the Google most searched list, which in turn got the attention of Matt Drudge. So for the very first time, we dead, non-living, ineffectual, ghost-like Americans who have no influence over our leaders were able to use our topper, the internet, to force a story into public consciousness. Well, if you think about it, though, isn't it a little bit absurd to think that the American people who have been subjected to these humiliating searches, that the American people whose most essential rights have been violated by these pedophiles and other miscreants at the TSA, that it would take this type of a technique to get people angry enough, to make people aware enough. You see, I think you're beginning to understand why people like Cass Sunstein find the internet to be so dangerous, because they are deathly afraid that we are beginning to talk to each other. That, it's a lot like, a woman's group or something, when they get together and start complaining about hubby, and they finally realize that they're not alone, that they are all, that there are certain common threads in the abuse of various groups of people, that the power structure, the thing that an abusive husband will always do. Now, I don't want to seem like a bleeding heart, but there are really bad men out there who abuse women, who abuse good women. And as decent people, I'm not talking like somebody who's supporting women's lib in the negative sense, but we have to support human dignity. If you've ever had a woman in your family, have you ever had a cousin or a sister who is married to an abuser? The first thing that they try to do is isolate the woman. They try to control the woman's ability to communicate with her family. The danger sign is isolation, the fact that the woman is no longer allowed to talk to her family members and friends. That isn't a sign that, well, they must be so much in love that, they don't need anybody else anymore. That is a danger sign suggesting possibly that it's not a matter of having shared values that make them want to go off and be by themselves, but rather that it could be an abusive husband who doesn't want the woman to connect with her circle of friends and family. That is a big danger sign. Do you realize that the techniques used by an abusive husband against his wife to isolate the woman from her family, from her network, her support network, is very much the same thing that's happened with the government and the mainstream media? You think that you're communicating with the world when you're sitting there in front of the television watching Fox News, when in fact you aren't. You're being talked to. The television isn't a means of expanding communication. Television has degenerated into a means of cutting off communication. Now, we didn't see it that way when television was first developed, because it was just an entertainment. People would devote maybe a couple of hours a night to television, and the rest of the time was devoted to communicating with family and friends. But since the development of television and the development and the incursion of mass culture into our homes, there is much more of a tendency to be isolated. This media doesn't really help us to connect with our neighbors. It isolates us from our neighbors. Yeah, and well, I guess I'd like to finish this thread with the TSA. I don't want to just jump on the bandwagon, but I think that this is really symbolically very important, because the TSA is really where the federal New World Order police state touches most people directly, far more than the IRS, far more than any sort of federal law enforcement in any other realm. This is where you are being trained to comply, where you're being trained to accept any level of degradation, any level of the government insinuating themselves into your physical space. That's why this is symbolically so important, that people resist in any way they can this kind of intrusion. I guess the other thing, I was going to talk a little bit about a CNN story trying to make people feel more comfortable with these scanners, but I think I'll skip that. Just by turning on your news, the propaganda that the scans really don't emit that much radiation, and they're not that intrusive, and that the TSA personnel aren't fondling your loved ones. That's baloney. I don't have to repeat that line. What SWAT teams will often do is tell you, while they're shooting you, they'll be telling you, we're here to protect you while they're shooting you or clubbing you over the head. So what else would you expect the official propaganda to be saying? But I wanted to finish the segment on the TSA and this intrusion into your personal space that's happening at the airports. This is very significant because of events that are unfolding with the economy collapsing and with your mobility now being severely restricted, and particularly your ability to move from one area. Now remember, the oligarchs, seeing what's going on in America, the oligarchs are already moving their goodies, their money, their jewelry, their family treasures offshore. But you, as the average American, I think that the main reason they don't really care about terrorists at the airport, because most of the terrorists that have appeared at airports were ushered onto airplanes by the people in the government to create this feeling of panic and this feeling of fear that would make you acquiesce to these kinds of intrusive searches. And I remember soon after these various events would take place, this programming where they would stick a microphone into the face of some little woman and say, well, what do you think of the airport security being tightened? And of course she would say, holding her little child in her arms, I'm all for the increased security, that type of thing. But I think that one of the main reasons they're doing these intrusive searches is they're not looking for weapons. They are looking to prevent you from moving from one area to another, moving out of the country, across the border, across state borders. They are looking to use these scanners as a way not only of keeping track of you personally, but keeping track of any potential movement of gold, any potential movement of cash, any potential movement of anything of value. They want to be able to completely control that. We were talking last night on the Liberty Net about the fact that we now have these regulations that state that every time you have a transaction involving more than $600, you have to fill out some sort of a tax form. If you sell something on eBay or whatever and it's more than $600 value, you have to fill out a tax form. They are obsessed with micromanaging you, because not only do you not really own the stuff that you have, you really don't even own yourself. That's the message that's being sent. So I think that it's worthwhile, even if it is Alex Jones that started this or the Drudge Report that started this, this is an opportunity for people, because I think everybody feels this sense of outrage, and everybody feels this sense of violation. Everybody can relate to the idea that some minimum wage pervert, and many of these guys have been caught in pedophile stings and that type of thing. If you won't protect your little girl from a big overgrown minimum wage pervert fondling, you are truly a broken, Man, if you won't defend against
Plenty
that.
dough and plenty of it.
WBCQ is under stress right now due to increased power costs. Expensive oil means expensive electricity, the lifeblood of generating and projecting RF power. Please go to www.wbcq.com, click on the donate link, and give whatever you can to keep WBCQ on the air. Okay, we're back. Let me talk a little bit about this interesting issue of the missile launch or whatever happened off the coast of California. Now, don't you find it interesting that the United States is playing economic warfare with Red China? We have apparently decided to debase the dollars that the Red Chinese hold. We are in effect, not the American people, because remember when Ben Bernanke and his parasitic, filthy bankster scum, when they do their thing with the currency, when they debase the American currency, they may be hurting the Red Chinese, and you may say, oh, that's great, we're really playing hardball with those evil Red Chinese, and we're going to get even with them. I got news for you. While he's debasing the currency to hurt the Chinese who are holding all of these US dollars, he's hurting you at the gas pump, he's hurting you at the food store, he's hurting you in every other area of your life where you have to use these devalued dollars. So he's, Ben Bernanke, this evil little degenerate who was just meeting at Jekyll Island to celebrate the 100th anniversary of their evil Federal Reserve and the takeover of the American economy, the coup that essentially destroyed the sovereignty of the United States and made us a slave population to the British banking empire and the Rothschild banking empire. That moment when the Federal Reserve Act was passed on a Christmas without enough people there in Congress to properly ratify the damn thing, we were recaptured by the British Empire officially, and we have been, we were not only recaptured, but we then became, I guess you would call it, we were then incarcerated as like a soldier deserting would be thrown into Leavenworth. The American people were not only recaptured by the British like a soldier that was AWOL, we were then thrown into confinement and slave labor to the British oligarchs and to the world oligarchs, fighting their wars for them as a slave army. And we've been doing that now for how many years? Wait until you see how you're finally rewarded. Because remember, the British oligarchs have recaptured you, used your children and your grandchildren, and used your grandfathers and your great-grandfathers to fight their wars. Ultimately, you will not be rewarded. You aren't going to get a pardon at the end of this involuntary servitude. Like Winston Smith in 1984, you will recant, you will scream, "Hail, Big Brother!" And at the end, you'll still be executed. Your country will still be destroyed because you can never assuage that ultimate sin of rebellion that the Founding Fathers perpetrated. You can never assuage that guilt except by committing suicide. Except by, like Winston Smith in 1984, when they're pointing the gun at you to shoot you, you'll be saying, "Thank you, Big Brother, we deserve to die. We're evil. We are the recalcitrant, wayward colony that must be destroyed." At any rate, the uninvited Chinese sub. Now listen to this. This is a story that ties into that vapor trail that we saw off the coast that is being claimed, that it was claimed that it was just a misinterpreted vapor trail of a jet plane or a bottle rocket that went up. Now listen to this story by Matthew Hinckley. The uninvited guest, Chinese sub pops up in middle of U.S. Navy exercise, leaving military chiefs red-faced. When the U.S. Navy deploys a battle fleet on its exercises, it takes the security of its aircraft carriers very seriously. At least a dozen warships provide a physical guard, while the technical wizardry of the world's only military superpower offers an invisible shield to detect and deter any intruders. That is the theory, or rather was the theory. A Chinese Song-class submarine, like the one that surfaced by the USS Kitty Hawk, Americans have left dumbstruck by an undetected Chinese submarine popping up at the heart of a recent Pacific exercise and close to the vast USS Kitty Hawk, a 1,000-foot supercarrier with 4,500 personnel on board. By the time it surfaced, this 160-foot Song-class diesel-electric attack submarine is understood to have sailed within a viable range of launching torpedoes or missiles at the carrier. According to senior NATO officials, the incident caused consternation in the U.S. Navy. The Americans had no idea China's fast-growing submarine fleet had reached such a level of sophistication or that it posed such a threat. One NATO figure said the effect was as big a shock as the Russians launching Sputnik, a reference to the Soviet Union's first orbiting satellite in 1957, which marked the start of the space age. The incident, which took place in the ocean between southern Japan and Taiwan, is a major embarrassment for the Pentagon. Battle stations. The Kitty Hawk carries 4,500 personnel. The lone Chinese vessel slipped past at least a dozen other American warships, which were supposed to protect the carrier from hostile aircraft or submarines. Now, Mike Rivero, of What Really Happened fame, on another broadcast network, was claiming that it was absurd to think that a Chinese sub might have gotten that close to our coast and launched. He was claiming that it was probably an American launch, like we had the launch that took down Flight 800. But I think that it's far more plausible that this was a demonstration that the Red Chinese were demonstrating to us while we were playing games with currency, while Ben Bernanke, this was a shot across our bow. Now remember, the last roundup is the alternative media. So speculation will run, well, let's say we'll take speculation as far as it will go. But it makes sense. This is the first thing that popped into my mind, that the Red Chinese were saber rattling when it was announced that we were going to debase the dollar to the degree this QE2, and now they're talking about QE3, quantitative easing. But remember, as much pleasure as you might get from screwing the Red Chinese. Now, also remember, should you be angry at the Red Chinese, or should you be angry at the greedy corporations that transferred our industry to Red China? That's the question of the day.
The story you are about to see is true.
Well, last night was a particularly enjoyable and edifying edition of the great Liberty Net, the great amateur radio institution. You can tune into the Liberty Net if you have a shortwave receiver capable of receiving single sideband transmissions. Usually the net will try to appear somewhere around 3.960, although now we have apparently some malicious interference from the BBC. They have set up a digital broadcasting operation right inside the amateur bans here in the United States without any, without any consideration of what that might do to the amateur radio operators. They really don't care, apparently. So they have mysteriously set up their latest digital broadcasting operation in the precise spot where the Liberty Net operates every week. I guess maybe they don't like the people in England hearing the truth. But at any rate, now we can be heard. We're gonna aim for somewhere around 3.966 megahertz. That's lower sideband. And this week we were talking about Mr. Obama. One of our participants in the Liberty Net is someone who is in the broadcast business. I guess you would call him an elder statesman of the broadcast business. And of course, he's not a particular fan of Mr. Obama. He's more of a neocon, this particular participant in the Liberty Net. We'll call him Vern. He is a broadcaster. He owns various radio stations, and he does editorials. And on the Liberty Net, he can be counted on to give kind of a neocon, I guess, point of view. Although I guess even neocons have been, the people who had been willing to go along with things like NAFTA and GATT, the people who had gone along with outsourcing because they were told by Rush Limbaugh that it was for the overall good of the American economy, are beginning to realize that this is absolutely the suicide of the United States of America. But Vern was talking about the fact that observing Mr. Obama on his $2 billion trip to the Far East, that he wanted Mr. Obama to succeed. And that seemed to me to be the kind of a thing that a politician might say. Well, we have a stake in our president succeeding, so we don't really want to see the man fail. Well, actually, I want to see Mr. Obama fail, and I'll tell you why I want to see Mr. Obama fail. Well, number one, he's really not the President of the United States, not legally the President of the United States, because he was not born in the United States. He was raised by people who hate the United States. Now, simply, I want Obama to fail because he hates the United States, and particularly the middle-class bourgeoisie of the United States. I want Mr. Obama to fail because he wants to level our economy to the level of the third world. I want Mr. Obama to fail because he wants us open. Now get this, his stated policy is that we will absorb a first strike. And if you paid attention to the story about the Red Chinese firing a missile off of our coast, and the fact that we're tweaking the Red Chinese and others, he wants us to absorb a first nuclear strike. Now, that's easy for him to say while he's sitting in a bunker, but the rest of us who have to be at ground zero of that first strike aren't going to be too pleased about his willingness to absorb a first strike. I want Mr. Obama to fail because he has sworn to strangle our energy production so that old people will freeze. This man actually bragged that under his plan, his economic plan to remake the United States in a third world image, energy prices would necessarily skyrocket. And that is a quote from Mr. Barack Hussein Obama. Now, when energy prices skyrocket, people who are barely able to keep their head above water will freeze this winter. They will starve this winter. They will be spending money that they should be spending on their mortgage or their property taxes on heating fuel, oil, and natural gas and electricity just to keep warm. And the costs are already skyrocketing. We're already living the nightmare envisioned by Barack Hussein Obama.
The last roundup will continue in a moment.
Hello, I'm Rita Moreno. Some vision changes are normal. Some are due to eye disease. Do you know the difference? Open your eyes to the facts. To get more information about vision and aging, or to find out about what help is available if you're having vision problems, call Lighthouse International at 1-800-829-0500 or visit www.lighthouse.org.
We are. Man can be permitted to exist only in order to serve others. He must be nothing but a tool for the satisfaction of their needs. Self-sacrifice is the law of our age. The man who refuses to submit and to serve, the supreme egoist, is a man who must be destroyed.
Hi, Al. Greetings once again from Wisconsin, where we just ended a great week of Indian summer. Today I would like to begin to address one of the main cogs in the wheel that is destroying our culture, and that is the issue of feminism, which is rarely talked about in our society today, and I think after a while we will understand why. I'm looking at a book titled Cruel Hoax: Feminism and the New World Order, written by Henry Makow. In his introduction, titled The Assault on Heterosexual Society, Makow writes, "What I am going to say will sound outrageous at first. It will fly in the face of what you've been taught. I ask only that you hear me out, and then verify or discredit my assertions at your leisure. This subject is so large that I can only connect the dots. The dots consist of articles that first appeared on my website, www.savethemales.ca. When you have finished this collection, you should get the picture." Born in 1949, my adult life coincided with a secret program of social engineering designed to destabilize society by programming straight people to behave like homosexuals. This insidious assault on heterosexuals masqueraded as the sexual revolution, gay rights, and feminism. This sounds preposterous because we think of homosexuality strictly in terms of same-sex attraction. However, homosexuality should be seen in broader terms, as arrested development caused by confusion over sexual identity, resulting in inability to bond permanently with a member of the opposite sex and, usually, establish a family. The main symptom of this disorder is the pursuit of impersonal sex for its own sake, that is, promiscuity. According to this definition, many heterosexuals can be classed as homosexuals. Indeed, elite social engineers appear to be aiming at a hetero-homo world, i.e., where individuals are bisexual, promiscuous, and bereft of family. Yes, a small minority of homosexuals are monogamous. Soon we might say the same thing about hetero-homos. The purpose of turning us into hetero-homos is to advance the centuries-old plan of an international financial elite based in the city of London to absorb the world's wealth and establish a veiled totalitarian one-world government devoted to Lucifer. This, quote, New World Order is in fact the old British Empire repackaged. The British Empire always represented a small, satanic, largely homosexual financial oligarchy that colonized England and much of the world. This group represents a union between Jewish finance and the British aristocracy, joined by money, marriage, and a belief in the occult. This may sound extreme to some, but if you dig, you will find that it is true. You might start with the article on my website, "The Jewish Conspiracy is British Imperialism." The plan, calls for the destruction of all collective forces capable of resistance. These forces, which support our human identity, are family, race, religion, and nation-state. They are to be eliminated through a campaign of tolerance which erases the differences between them. If you accept everything, eventually you become nothing. Thus we have ecumenicalism in religion, miscegenation in race, and regionalism in national states. You destroy family by erasing gender differences. Their goal is one world government, one race, one religion, and ultimately one sex, the hetero-homo. Families give people their purpose, identity, and sense of belonging. They provide values and a measure of social, spiritual, and financial independence. The goal of communism and the New World Order always has been the destruction of the family. This forces people to get their sense of belonging from the elite-run media, political causes, or products. We only know what we are taught, and obviously they aren't going to reveal this to us. The nature of conspiracy is that it pursues a subversive agenda while actively denying it. For example, Arnold Toynbee told an elite gathering in Copenhagen in 1931, quote, "I will merely repeat that we are at present working discreetly but with all our might to wrest this mysterious political force called sovereignty out of the clutches of the local national states of our world. And all the time we are denying with our lips what we are doing with our hands." End quote. Elite social engineers turn us into hetero-homos by confusing us about our sexual identity. They deny that obvious gender differences exist and convince young women to act like men. They portray the traditional feminine role as an artificial and oppressive social stereotype. Sex roles are artificial unless, of course, they are reversed. Then women can act like stereotypical men, and men can be stereotypically feminine. Social engineers know people are lazy and gullible and prefer to do as they are cajoled rather than to use their own reason or instinct. Thus, when a subversive power takes secret control, people are easily manipulated. Heterosexual roles are not invented. They correspond to biological differences. For example, men have 10 times more testosterone than women. This hormone turns men into single-minded, aggressive risk-takers. Women's brains are different. For example, they talk 3 times as much and twice as fast as men. Sex roles represent cultural recognition of biological and psychological differences. When sex roles are denied, confusion results. We can't bond with the opposite sex. Our natural instincts are frustrated and arrested development and dysfunction follow. Heterosexuality is not a sexual preference. It is part of the reproductive cycle. Each stage, marriage, parenthood, etc., is necessary for our development and happiness as human beings. For most people, parenthood is essential to personal fulfillment. Social health depends on raising the new generation in a wholesome environment with positive values. We are being conditioned to follow a hetero-homo pattern intended to arrest our development at the courtship stage and make us dysfunctional, barren, and docile. This is why practically all movies and music are fixated on romance, as if the whole population has been frozen at age 19 to 26. In less than 50 years, feminism and sexual liberation have ravaged the institution of the family. Feminism pretends to champion women when in fact it disparages feminine qualities. It has ruined the lives of millions of women and men who now can't find lasting love. A damage inventory consists of the following. The number of married with children households has declined by half, from 50% of the total in 1960 to 25% today. In 1965, 25% of black infants and 3.1% of white infants in the United States were born to single mothers. By 1990, the rates had risen to 64% for black infants, 18% for whites. The marriage rate has fallen nearly 30% since 1970, while the divorce rate has increased about 40%. The fertility rate has declined by almost 1/2. In 1960, an average Canadian woman had 4 children. Today, she is barely 1.5. In 2002, the U.S. non-Hispanic birth rate was at its lowest point in history, about 1.8. Just maintaining the population requires a birth rate of 2.2. Most of our social pathologies, crime, imprisonment, welfare, educational, underachievement, alcohol and drug abuse, suicide, depression, sexually transmitted diseases, are manifestations, direct and indirect, of the crack-up of the modern American family. Femininity is defined by a woman's love for husband, children, and home. Masculinity is defined by power and leadership. Male power is the ultimate aphrodisiac for women. Men naturally seek power. Women want love. Thus, the heterosexual contract, marriage, is the exchange of female, worldly power for male power expressed as love. Women empower men by entrusting their power to them in exchange for love. Marriage channels male power into a socially constructive path, raising and supporting a family. Women cannot have it all. They must choose between love and power in the personal sphere. This is how heterosexuality works. An ideology that equalizes power is designed to neuter heterosexuals. It turns women into men and emasculates men. It creates hetero-homos, two sames instead of two complements, unable to bond. The purpose is political. The plutocracy does not want men who can defend and reform society. In 1976, an insider, Harold Rosenthal, Senator Jacob Javits' assistant, gave a famous interview. Quote, "We have castrated society through fear and intimidation. Its manhood exists only in combination with a feminine outward appearance. Being so neutered, the populace has become docile and easily ruled. As all geldings, their thoughts are not involved with the concerns of the future and their posterity, but only with the present and with the next meal." End quote. The unprecedented decline of the family was caused by mass psychological conditioning ordered by the central banking cartel using the CIA, the Rockefeller Foundation, the mass media, government, and the education system. A privately owned international cartel based in London controls the credit of the world's nations. Essentially, they create money out of thin air based on our credit, that is, our productive capacity and property. They create this money by virtue of loaning it to us. The bankers can buy everything and anyone they want, including politicians, media empires, and universities. Thus, they define reality. As Nathan Rothschild famously said, "I care not what puppet is placed on the throne of England to rule the empire. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply." End quote. When the government wants money, it has to petition these bankers like little children. It sells a bond to these bankers who allow it to withdraw the, quote, money. This, quote, money takes the form of a bookkeeping entry. That is, it is produced out of nothing. Our currency represents an IOU that the government owes these bankers. It costs the bankers paper and ink to issue these IOUs. Yet the government must repay the face value of this, quote, loan with interest. Remember, this, quote, money is backed by our, that is, the taxpayers' credit. The government easily could exploit its own credit and print all the money it needed to make the economy purr interest-free. This was the program of the much maligned Social Credit Party. Only then would the government have real power. The people would no longer be collateral for this debt. We would be free men, not human resources. Mankind is stymied because a tiny clique usurped control of money-making. This began when gold dealers realized they could issue receipts for gold they didn't have. They became bankers who figured they could also issue more loans than they have money by a simple bookkeeping entry. They used this golden goose to take control of the world's wealth and put accomplices in charge of government, media, and education. They arranged for our national governments to guarantee the paper they print. In order to protect its golden goose, the banking cartel has to control us. Since the 18th century, it has been scheming to create a world government dictatorship. They mask this plot with talk about ending poverty and war, but they create both. World government is really designed to ensure no country defaults on its debt or tries to escape from its bondage. The motivation behind 9/11 and the war on terror is to create the apparatus of a world police state. The bankers are responsible for most of humanity's woes. They start wars and depressions in order to distract and divide us. They create the social trends and ideologies that make us superficial and dysfunctional. They provide a list of approved politicians. They determine what we learn from the mass media and schools. It is far easier to control people who think they are free. Much of what we consider normal is an elaborate hoax. Wars are planned years in advance and carefully orchestrated. Both sides of every war, including the Cold War and the War on Terror, are controlled. The central bankers created communism as a dry run for the New World Order. In 1953, Ford Foundation President Rowan Gaither brazenly told congressional researcher Norman Dodd that the State Department, the United Nations, etc., had for years, quote, operated under directives issued by the White House that we should make every effort to so alter life in the United States as to make possible a comfortable merger with the Soviet Union, end quote. The bankers have ample means to create their own enemies. They give their puppets the money and publicity to eclipse any uncontrolled resistance. They call this dialectic, creating two opposing forces which then destroy each other, leaving the bankers unscathed, richer and even more powerful. It's called divide and conquer. The central bankers created both communism and Nazism and then orchestrated World War II, where they destroyed each other. The same thing may be happening in the run-up to World War III. The aim is to demoralize, brutalize, and degrade humanity and kill off the new generation of men. They are creating a new feudalism, which reduces the masses to the status of serfs. They must first destroy race, religion, family, and nation. By no coincidence, this was exactly the program of communism. Feminism is about destroying the family. Feminist theorists have a lesbian hatred of heterosexuality and blame the patriarchy for all the world's problems. Feminism is but one example of how a small, sick financial elite holds mankind hostage. Other examples are the suppression of cures to cancer and sources of cheap, abundant, pollution-free energy. Well, I think we will stop here and take up this subject at a future date. This was just part of the introduction to that fascinating little book titled Cruel Hoax, Feminism and the New World Order. This is a topic that I think more people should know about because it has really gone a long way to destroy the biblical foundation and the culture of what was once the United States of America. And on that note, I will say, talk to you later, Al.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. Well, I couldn't resist commenting on something that seems to be in the media this week. So-called mainstream media, particularly Fox News, seem to be spending a tremendous amount of time as George W. Bush, the disgraced predecessor to our current disgrace in the White House, was making the rounds of Greta Van Susteren and Bill O'Reilly and most nauseatingly Sean Hannity, claiming, doing his best to reclaim his great legacy. Now that Barack Hussein Obama has turned out to be the nightmare that, of course, many of us expected him to be, and he has more than lived up to all of the worst nightmares that we might entertain about what a president not born in the United States, who had been inculcated by his communist parents in America hatred, what someone who was born and grew up in an environment where he was taught to loathe, particularly the American middle class, what the horrible effects of electing such a person to be president might be. There's no surprise about Barack Hussein Obama and what he has managed to accomplish. But let's remember one thing before we start, getting nostalgic for George W. Bush, that if not for the perfidy, for the lies, for the incompetence, for the shilling for various powers in the Middle East, that Mr. George W. Bush, the minion of the great British banks, had this degenerate not been in the White House, not discredited the presidency, not discredited the United States, not either wittingly or unwittingly saw to it that we suffered a death blow on 9/11/2001, had this creature, George W. Bush, not made America desperate for a change, and I don't mean John McCain. John McCain would have merely been George W. Bush on steroids, with a little bit of not stupidity. In the case of George W. Bush, it's evil and stupidity equals destruction. In the case of John McCain, it was evil plus insanity equals God knows what. But had we not had George W. Bush, we never would have had the disastrous presidency of Barack Hussein Obama. And let us remember that the Patriot Act, the crowning jewel of the George W. Bush presidency, was literally, in itself, treason. So, as you were treated this week, a very bizarre book release, the fact that George W. Bush, the fact that Fox News would feel this great need, the Rupert Murdoch organization, Roger Ailes, one of the great architects of Rush Limbaugh's rise to fame. Remember Rush Limbaugh. Now, of course, we have all drifted back into the web of Rush Limbaugh because naturally, with a boogeyman like Barack Hussein Obama, we're desperately looking for people who are opposed to Barack Hussein Obama, not remembering that Rush Limbaugh was supportive of and gave us, with his boss, with his associate Roger Ailes, created the environment for us to be in the thrall of a George W. Bush and see the USA Patriot Act destroy our Constitution, see George W. Bush and his criminal cohorts like Michael Chertoff and all of the neocons like Richard Pearl, and probably the most despicable group of dastardly characters ever assembled on one stage. They raped and pillaged the United States. The economy was raped and pillaged by the Bushites. So let's not lose sight, as much of a horrendous nightmare as Barack Hussein Obama is. Let's not forget that George W. Bush got us here. I want to get right back into 12 examples of ridiculous regulations in case you thought that it was just the federal government that was making your life miserable. The state of Texas now requires every new computer repair technician to obtain a private investigator's license. In order to receive a private investigator's license, an individual must have either a degree in criminal justice or must complete a 3-year apprenticeship with a licensed private investigator. If you are a computer repair technician that violates this law, or if you are a regular citizen that has a computer repaired by someone not in compliance with the law, you can be fined up to $4,000 and you can be put in jail for a year. Now remember, Texas is touted as a good old-fashioned cowboy state where government ain't going to make me do nothing I don't want to do. Want to bet? Number 2, the city of Philadelphia now requires all bloggers to purchase a $300 business privilege license. The city even went after one poor woman who had earned only $11 from her blog over the past 2 years. Number 3, the state of Louisiana says that monks must be fully licensed as funeral directors and actually convert their monasteries into licensed funeral homes before they will be allowed to sell their handmade wooden caskets. Number 4, in the state of Massachusetts, all children in daycare centers are mandated by state law to brush their teeth after lunch. In fact, the state even provides the fluoride toothpaste for children. Number 5, if you attempt to give a tour of our nation's capital without a license, you will be put in prison for 90 days. Number 6, federal agents recently raided an Amish farm at 5 a.m. in the morning because they were selling unauthorized raw milk. We've all heard about that one. Number 7, in Lake Elmo, Minnesota, farmers can be fined $1,000 and put in jail for 90 days for selling pumpkins or Christmas trees that are grown outside the city limits. Number 8, a U.S. District Court judge slapped a $500 fine on Massachusetts fisherman Robert J. Eldridge for untangling a giant whale from his nets and setting it free. So what was his crime? Well, according to the court, Eldridge was supposed to call state authorities and wait for them to do it. Number 9, and you know how efficient those state authorities are. Number 9, in the state of Texas, it doesn't matter how much formal interior design education you have, only individuals with government licenses may refer to themselves as interior designers or use the term interior design to describe their work. Number 10, deeply hidden in the 2,400-page health care reform bill passed by Congress was a new regulation that would require U.S. businesses to file millions more 1099s each year. In fact, it is estimated that the average small business will now have to file 200 additional 1099s every single year. Talk about a nightmare of red tape, but don't try to avoid this rule. It is being reported that the IRS has hired approximately 2,000 new auditors to audit as many of these 1099s as possible. And number 11, in the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, makes it incredibly difficult to go out of business. In order to close down a business, Milwaukee requires you must first purchase an expensive license. You must submit a huge pile of paperwork to the city regarding the inventory you wish to sell off. Well, at any rate, contrast this with the fact that all of these free trade agreements have made it very easy for the Red Chinese to sell us unlimited garbage, poisonous food, and substandard goods, while American businesses are now being held to this level of scrutiny.
The last Roundup is a presentation of Radio National.
I'm heading for the last roundup. Gonna saddle old pain for the last time and ride. So long, old pal, it's time your tears were dry. Heading for the last roundup. Get along, little doggy, get along, get along, get along, little doggy, get along. Get along, little doggy, get along, little doggy, get along, little doggy, get along. I'm heading for the last roundup. The faraway ranch of the boss in the sky, where the strays are counted and branded. There go